We are with Perry Hendricks today. We're going to talk about skeptical theism. I'm confused because he registered his name on this Zoom call as my name, Pat Flynn. I guess you're trolling me? Is that what's happening right now?
That's what's happening right now.
Well, it's good to have you here, Perry. I've read your work for a while. You've got a book out on skeptical theism. Unfortunately, because of my idiocy, I messed up the time zones. We're a little bit shorter on time today, so we're going to try and get to the action fairly quickly. But before we do, the dull preliminaries, as Pepe Le Pew would say, are probably in order. So tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you do, and how you got interested in this area of philosophy.
Well, first off, we're both idiots because I also messed up the time zone. Second, it's good to be here speaking to the Lorax.
Well, thank you, good sir. Right.
And how did I get into this? Into philosophy or into skeptical theism?
Yeah, well, one, two. Do the 1, 2, yeah.
I had a friend who I don't know. I had a friend who became an atheist a while ago, and then that got me interested in philosophy of religion. We started talking about having conversations, unbelievably stupid conversations. Mm-hmm. You can't imagine how dumb these were. But they were, looking back, it's so embarrassing. But that got me interested into philosophy. And eventually I somehow stumbled upon God, Freedom, and Evil by Alvin Plantinga. And then, the scales fell from my eyes and I saw how good philosophy can be. And yeah, I've been reading philosophy since then. I guess that would have been 2011, 2012, something like that. Mm-hmm. And then, so that's how I got into philosophy. How did I get into skeptical theism? I'm not exactly sure. I somehow read Hud Hudson's The Father of Lies, which is a really good paper on skeptical theism and poses the skeptical worry for skeptical theism. It's one of the few ones that does it well. Mm-hmm. And I completely went over my head, no clue what was going on in that paper. And then that would have been in 2016, and then maybe in August. And then 3 or 4 months later, I had a drink of tequila and I watched Schindler's List. And then in the midst of that, the core of skeptical theism hit me, and I understood it. Whatever was went over my head in that paper, finally clicked. And then since then, I have been doing stuff related to skeptical theism.
Yeah, wow, dude, what a story. So next time I'm struggling with a philosophical idea, I guess I'll bring out the old granddad and watch a Liam Neeson movie, see what sort of tricks I can
Yeah, it's a really overrated movie. The color's terrible.
Yeah, man. I've actually never seen it. I know of it, but I've shamefully never seen that movie. I've seen the whole Taken series though, so that makes up for it. All right, so skeptical theism. There's a lot here. There's obviously a lot here. How do you like to introduce people to the idea? What is this project all about? What sort of issue or set of issues is it trying to deal with? Let's get started.
Well, I should have a better elevator pitch at this point, but I don't. So generally, we can think of, maybe it's best to introduce it in the context of a fairly popular argument from evil. So there's some kind of argument that evil that goes something like this, take some particularly bad evil we know of that's really, really bad. And we say something like, look, we don't know of any reason that would justify God in allowing this evil. Therefore, probably there is no such reason. But, if God exists, there has to be such a reason. There has to be some kind of reason that would justify him in allowing this. Mm-hmm. And so probably God doesn't exist. Something like that. What unites all kinds of skeptical theism are going to be a rejection of that inference from we don't currently recognize a reason that would justify God in allowing that evil, to the conclusion that therefore probably there is no such reason.
Right.
Every skeptical theist is going to reject that. The reasons are going to vary depending on what kind of skeptical theism is being discussed. But you might think of skeptical theism as skepticism about our ability to make judgments about what God would do. But that's not really accurate. Like, that's not exactly what I want to say. But that's a really general overview.
Yeah, good. Okay, so I'm trying to think of one of the better ways to dive into this here, because there's a lot of things I want to discuss with you concerning skeptical theism. It's a project that I think I'm very attracted to, but I just haven't spent enough time, honestly, with it to like fully, make up my mind. Your book actually moved me and I think along the path towards.
So would you call my writing moving?
Deeply and poetic and poetic. I was actually impressed with the amount of humor you seem to have smuggled into your work there. That itself was an impressive project, especially since it was it Palgrave, your book?
Yeah, they made me take out some jokes, unfortunately, but
yeah, usually I feel like only like kind of, I don't know, Flanagan or somebody can kind of get away with that, but you did a good job. Okay, so let's begin with the skeptical worries, because I think those are the ones that I think a lot of people are held up on. So the idea is, hey, just because I don't see a reason, that doesn't mean that I'm, that there probably is no reason. Why should I expect to have, a grasp of all the reasons that God would have for why it might be permissible to permit certain state of affairs? And I guess the general concern is, hey, does this mean that like we can have zero expectations of God, or it puts us completely in the dark concerning like what God could or couldn't do, or how God could treat us? And okay, maybe that doesn't ruin moral reasoning for us. I guess if you hold a certain like moral theory, like if you're a natural law theorist, like maybe we can still think, through moral issues concerning human relations. But it seems like we should be able to, at least have some expectations of God and moral expectations of God. Does skeptical theism just totally undercut that? How should we think about this? Mm-hmm.
That's interesting that you bring natural law. I don't subscribe to natural law theory, but I'd never thought about how you might endorse natural law theory, and that might sort of render that might sort of make it such that like moral skepticism objections don't work.
I think it does. I think it absolutely does. Because if you're a natural law theorist, right? Well, we're concerned about human nature, and we know enough about that, right? That's not an issue. It's the divine nature that we're now worried about, right? So I guess that's a separate.
That's a clever point. You should write that up.
I am writing it up actually in a different paper, but the paper I'm writing on it probably will also could be susceptible to this type of concern. So I do take the sort of natural law approach there. Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, let's look at, so the kind of skeptical theism that I'm interested in is something that's, well, there's two kinds of skeptical theism I explicitly endorse. One is kind of an axiological skeptical theism about value, and that is basically Michael Bergman's skeptical theism, but formulated a bit differently and with a few bells and whistles added. But the more important kind of skeptical theism I'm interested in is what I call deontological skeptical theism. And I'm going to remove some bells and whistles from this definition because that would be annoying. But we can state skeptical theism something like this, or at least the deontological skeptical theism something like this. Like, we have no good reason to think that the perceived weight of God's reasons for permitting or causing some state of affairs resembles the actual weight of his reasons for that. And so, okay, how can a skeptical worry be given with that? Well, somebody might say something like, look, if we have no good reason to think that the perceived weight of God's reasons for permitting or causing some state of affairs resembles the actual weight of his reasons, then that seems to result in moral skepticism. If we are really this clueless about reasons and so on, then how can we know what we ought to do? And this has a really simple, a simple reply, which is just like, well, deontological skeptical theism is a skepticism about God's reasons, not our reasons. Maybe you can make an argument for why we should be skeptical about our reasons, but it doesn't just fall out from the deontological skeptical theism. And can you hear that?
Yeah, but it's definitely not a problem. I have soon to be 6 of those right downstairs. So
this. So the thought here is that, look, deontological skeptical theism is about God's reasons, not our reasons. Morality, as we're concerned with it, is about our reasons. So nothing follows from that immediately. So it looks like moral skepticism isn't a big deal. It's these kind of objections aren't going to work. with respect to a more general skepticism, well, I think that the right way to go about that is to just do epistemology and then see if skeptical theism fits with it. So look at mainstream theories of knowledge and see if skeptical theism undermines them. So basically, I just don't think that skeptical theism conflicts with any mainstream theory of knowledge. I don't think it has that effect. And so it looks like skeptical theism doesn't entail that we don't have knowledge about whatever issue we're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I like that. I like that approach. So let's tie that into another, I guess, a variant of that sort of objection. And I imagine your response will be somewhat similar, but let's get it out there, right? There's the worry of, oh, hey, if God has reasons to let Susie suffer, well, then shouldn't I just follow God? And shouldn't I just let Susie suffer, right? Rather than working to alleviate Susie's suffering, which seems, at least, yeah, that seems intuitively to be the thing that I ought to do, right? Mm-hmm.
Well, it depends. So what we ought to do is determined by the weight of our reasons for an action. Mm-hmm. And so it could be that, well, you have, just because someone else has reason to allow something, it doesn't mean that I have reason to allow it. So, like I have reasons to feed my kids because they're my kids. You have reasons to feed my kids in the sense that you have reasons to ensure people are fed or something like that. Mm-hmm. But they're different reasons. They have different weight and so on. So just because we know that you have, that something has certain reasons to allow something, it doesn't follow that I do.
Yeah.
And so I don't think that that generates a skeptical worry. Because when I'm figuring out what I should do, I need to look at my reasons, not somebody else's.
Yeah, that's
assuming that they're in the same. I guess if they're in the same, if they occupy the same role as me, then I can look at them. But they typically aren't, and God certainly doesn't. God has a different set of reasons than I do.
Different relationship,
a different relation to the world.
Yeah, that's good, and I think that's a relevant difference. Certainly, that's something you see in natural law, right? I think there's a good kind of natural law response to that too, but I don't think you need natural law to make that sort of response. Okay. All right, so that's it. Skeptical theism wins then? Are those the two? Right?
Skeptical theism does win. That's correct.
All right. So I kind of dove into two worries that I know numerous people have had. The skeptical worry seems to be ones that oftentimes makes people hesitant to endorse skeptical theism. How do you think skeptical theism does with response to, say, like Draper's problem evil? Do you think that there's still a cost to skeptical theism insofar as, hey, the naturalist actually seems to have an explanation here, whereas the theist is saying, well, there is an explanation, but I don't see what it is, essentially, right? Is that a cost? Is it not a cost? If it is a cost, maybe you don't think it's like the biggest cost in the world when we weigh up all the other considerations. How do you think through this?
Well, let me add first that if we're talking about the skeptical objections to skeptical theism, I think that the ones that are good are basically Hudson's and Nevin Kleimenhage's, and I might be forgetting one others, but most of them aren't really worth much time. So just for the record,
it's a public record now.
And then, so how does it compare? How does it affect Draper's argument? Well, so I don't know. I don't see Draper's argument as being in terms of, can theism explain this? Well, I guess that depends on how we cache explanations, right? Mm-hmm. So, Draper finds, talks about these certain facts that are more likely to obtain given a non-theistic hypothesis than given theism. Mm-hmm. And if that's the case, we have evidence against theism. But what I want to say to there is something like this. Like, look, if we have no good reason to think that the perceived weight of God's reasons resembles the actual weight of his reasons, then it follows that we can't make a probability assignment of how likely these facts about evil are given theism. But if that's the case, we can't ascribe a probability there. Then we can't do this probability comparison of the facts about evil given theism versus the facts about evil given a non-theistic hypothesis. Usually he's using the hypothesis of indifference. And so if that's the case, you can't make the comparative claim that the facts are more likely given the non-theistic hypothesis than given theism. And then it just follows that we don't have evidence against theism on that view.
Yeah. Okay. So I do think that's effective, but then that immediately ties to something that you address in one of your papers. I think you address it into your book too, is what implications does that have for natural theology? Of course. Right. So my initial thought was, well, okay, maybe it does have implications for the natural theologian who does the sort of worldview comparison thing and is, running fine tuning arguments based off of, that would God have reasons to create a world like this and beings like us? But I don't think it would affect the natural theologian who's a little bit, I don't know, crustier, old school, who just starts with the traditional metaphysical analysis and kind of runs those deductive arguments. They seem fine, right? So that approach, I think, if you think that's a good approach, would definitely not be fazed by skeptical theism. But what about the more contemporary approach? You think there's a cost there?
So yeah, I agree that those crusty natural theologians might not.
Like Aristotle's not going to be bothered by skeptical theism, right?
Well, he's also not going to be bothered because he's dead.
That's true.
So,
right. Good point.
So there are a large class of arguments that aren't going to be even in principle susceptible to skeptical theism. So, like modal cosmological arguments or cosmological arguments in general, arguments from contingency, the modal ontological argument, those kinds of arguments aren't going to be susceptible to this because they aren't making any claims about the weight of God's reasons and going from there. This isn't to endorse all those arguments. This is just to say that they aren't susceptible to any skeptical worries here. But there are a class of arguments that there are a bunch of arguments that are susceptible to these worries. So traditional formulations of the fine-tuning argument, traditional formulations of the psychophysical harmony argument, although traditional seems like a weird word for something that's like kind of new, right? Old or something. So it's a new tradition. Arguments from consciousness, they're traditionally motivated by saying like, look, here's this phenomena that's so good. God is good, so God will have reason to do that or something like that. And yeah, that's going to be a problem for that's going to be a problem. It's going to be undercut by skeptical theism. But I think that there are ways to sort of revamp these arguments, or at least some of them, in ways that will result in them not being undermined. So you might think, and from the outset, let me say, you can also try to do this with some arguments for atheism as well. I try to do that a little bit with arguments from evil, but I don't think they have a lot more challenging time being successful when you do it this way. So one way to think about this is you might think, okay, what kind of world should we expect if theism is true? We might think something like this, like, well, if God exists, he's this maximally great being, so we can expect that things will be great insofar as, but not because they resemble him in some way. So if God is this conscious, at least a conscious agent, we could expect him to create a world that would contain something like this great making feature. Now, I know that you're quaking in your Thomist boots because God isn't conscious or something.
I know we discussed this, and it's a hard thing to think about, right? But please continue, right? I'll try to keep my quaking to a minimum, right?
So if we think about, if we can pick out certain facts that or certain features that a maximally great being would have, then we can also identify certain features that would probably be in a world that would be created by that being. And I think we can do that about consciousness. I think that conscious agency is something a maximally great being would have, because anyone that didn't have it, you could add that feature and it would be better, immensely better. And you might also, so in virtue of that, I think you can get some arguments from consciousness off the ground. You also have to show that the probability is higher given theism than given these non-theistic hypotheses. But that's not going to matter that's not going to be affected by skeptical theism. As long as you can get that probability assignment from the theistic hypothesis, that should be good. So, okay, what else can you do? Well, I think that you can probably do something like psychophysical harmony. If you chaos is something that's bad. If you have a maximally great being that's chaotic, or if you have a being that's chaotic, you can improve it by making it non-chaotic. So you might think something like if you're disharmonious psychophysically, it would be a bad making feature. Well, that's not how do I want to say it? I want to say something like this. So since a maximally great being would not be chaotic, you could expect some kind of world that wouldn't be crazy chaotic. And so psychophysical harmony is one way to lack that chaos, to have that within you. And also conscious agency. If you have a conscious agent that is psychophysically harmonious, that's again a case of non-chaos that's going to be relevant. It's a feature of a maximally great being. And so you can ascribe some kind of decent probability to that being, to God creating a world that has that feature. And so those are two arguments that you can get running off the ground. You could also probably just do some kind of nomological argument about the non-chaotic nature of the world. But there are ways to do that. And then I leave for further homework if people want to figure out if we can run like a resurrection argument. That's going to be a little more tough. But
sure. Yeah. Okay. That's really interesting. First off, I certainly believe that God is an unrestricted act of understanding himself. So I definitely, people are going to think like, Pat doesn't think God is conscious. That sounds really, no, I just think God's like mode of knowledge and intellectual, those things is very different than ours. I certainly want to say that. And I don't think it's inconsistent with anything that you've said. I'm trying to think like here, maybe, because in one sense, you might just be like willing to take the deal. It's like, okay, I'll give up the fine tuning argument and psychophysical harmony, but like now we've, completely neutralized the biggest argument from atheism. And I still have all these other arguments, and there's probably a couple good ones, over there. But I like that you're being creative and thinking about other ways you could still motivate those types of arguments, even if they need a bit of adjusting. I guess the trick is, would those adjustments work for the problem of evil, right? And you think generally no, or at least you haven't seen how that's the case, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, although I don't want to say this is a matter of taking a deal. So I just think it's skeptical theism is true, and the epistemic chips can fall where they may.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. Yeah, that was a bad way of phrasing it, right? Yeah. Yeah, and I get it. Like you really think that this is correct, skeptical theism, and now we're just kind of figuring out what follows from that, right?
Yeah, let's put it this way: we've discovered skeptical theism is correct. It's a discovery.
Yes, that's
scientifically
good.
Proven.
Yeah, that's good. And in many ways, so man, I wonder like maybe if you go back to some of those traditional, principles of the good is self-diffusive and the principle of plenitude, if those would be enough to rework some of those other arguments too, in light of skeptical theism. You know what I mean? I mean, it requires bringing in some of those crusty old metaphysical ideas again, but no, I don't think all of them are half bad, right?
Yeah, and then you want to see if they can also be worked for arguments from atheism, but I find it a lot harder to rework the atheistic arguments. I think it's a lot harder to run arguments from evil that way, probably even with the crusty metaphysics.
Yeah, right on. Okay,
but that's probably you can work on.
Yeah, I'll get right to it. What are what's another objection to skeptical theism that we haven't discussed yet, do you think is important to get on the table?
Oh man. Well, I mean,
you really think skeptical theism is strong and correct. I love it.
I'm trying to think of what objection would be good. So some are more complicated than others.
Of course.
And I'm trying to think of what might be more easy to go with. So I'm tempted to talk about equiprobability objections, but those ones are a little technical, and if I don't have something written out in front of me, I might say something stupid.
That's fine.
I say stupid things all the time, but
yeah. but we don't. Yeah, you don't want to deal with that in the comment section. I understand. So we can direct people to your book, which is very, very, very good for that sort of careful analysis. So.
But I suppose one other skeptical objection I could mention quickly. It's going to go along the lines of the others, but it's something like, look, we don't know anything about, or if it's really true that we have no good reason to think that, the perceived weight of God's reasons, so the reasons that we're aware of and their weights resembles the actual weight of God's reasons for whatever, then it looks like that might undermine any knowledge claims one might make based off divine testimony. So take some instance of divine testimony, from any scripture, and then you might think, well, look, it's possible that God has reasons that his reasons are such that he could permissibly deceive us here.
Right. Yeah. Maybe he just wants to lie to us. Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that looks like it's a problem. Skeptical theism prevents us from, it prevents certain methods of us coming to think that God wouldn't deceive us with respect to these instances of divine testimony. And so it looks like we don't really have any knowledge based on divine testimony or justified beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
So this worry is pushed very well by Hud Hudson in The Father of Lies, and also a little book called A Grotesque in the Garden. The problem, what I think is a problem for this objection is that it relies on the reductionist view of testimonial justification or knowledge. So there's reductionists and non-reductionists about testimonial knowledge and justification. Reductionists think that in addition to having good quality testimony, you also need to have these other positive reasons for trusting the testifier with respect to that instance of testimony. So, if you tell me your name's Pat, I can think of some good reasons that would, and that's good quality testimony. You're saying something that's true. One reason I have to trust you here is you're a human. Humans tend to not lie about their names and so on. You're wearing glasses. People with glasses are going to be more honest or something like that.
Certainly. But what am I hiding behind the beard? That's the question, right?
That's true. But the Lorax would never lie.
Metaphysically impossible. That's right. Yeah.
So the thought here is that for the skeptical worry to work, so this skeptical objection is relying on this reductionist view of testimonial knowledge, and I think that view is false. And I'm not using, like, in the other humanities outside of philosophy, they tend to use reductionist as like some kind of negative term, like, oh, you're just a reductionist about this. I'm not using that in this way here. Right. I'm just meaning it to mean this view of testimonial justification or knowledge. So, right, I think that's false. I don't think you need to have positive reason in order to acquire justified beliefs based on testimony. I think that so long as it's good quality testimony, that you can, and you don't have like a defeater or something like that, you can have justified beliefs based on it. So I think that even if skeptical theism prevents you from acquiring these positive reasons for trusting God's testimony or some purported instance of divine testimony, that so long as it's good quality testimony, it's going to be justified. And for whatever it's worth, which is probably almost nothing, I think non-reductionism is the majority view in the epistemology of testimony.
Yes, the consensus. Well, we mavericks around here that usually like to challenge that, but in this aspect, it sounds totally
consensus.
Right.
A consensus in philosophy is worth very little, but right. But whatever it's worth, there it is.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's very good, and that's obviously going to be relevant to right, for those who have the particular religious commitments. Okay, all right. So we spent a fair amount of time here for a little bit of time we have left, since we've been just kind of dealing, with the objections to skeptical theism. Just give us some of like the advantage. Why do you think skeptical theism not only is true, but compared to all the other strategies that people have to dealing with the problem of evil, I can think of a couple, right? The one is like the cheap one, right? And the cheap one is God exists, so it's not a problem, right? It's not going to convince a lot of people, but I don't know. Maybe you think you've got like some ironclad demonstrations. So it's like, look, God exists. There's bad states of affairs. They must be compatible. I don't see how. I'm not going to be bothered by it, right? Then there's defenses. There's various theodicies, and then there's, of course, skeptical theism. So where do you think this is really moving the discussion forward? How? Yeah, just I guess I'm asking you to maybe try and sell the gentle listener on it a little bit.
So, well, first, here's why everyone should be a skeptical theist, as I define it. So skeptical theism is the view that we have no good reason to think. Deontological skeptical theism is the view that we have no good reason to think that the perceived weight of God's reasons resembles the actual weight of his reasons. Well, that view is going to be correct unless and until we're given a reason for thinking otherwise. So it's like kind of, I'm driving a car and I have a good reason to think that the car in front of me is going to turn left because its left blinkers turned on. But my daughter doesn't, because she doesn't recognize any reason for thinking that. Now, with skeptical theism, just based on the claim, we have no good reason to think this. It's going to be true that we have no good reason until or unless somebody can offer such a reason. I say the reasons on offer are bad, and they're also really weird. Like, imagine that I'm trying to tell you, you said we have no good reason to not drive drunk, and I were to say, of course we have good reasons to not drive drunk. If you drive drunk, these wild skeptical scenarios will ensue. That'd be really weird, right? Why not just, identify a positive reason, like, you will injure yourself or others. It's risky. Those are positive reasons to not drive drunk. With skeptical theism, there are very few actual challenges to it. People usually just say it results in skepticism. But the thesis of skeptical theism is pretty bold. It just says we have no good reason to think this, which means we don't recognize any reason as being a good reason for that. So one reason to endorse it is, well, nobody even tries to offer these reasons. It's very rare. There's been a couple. Paul Draper and Richard Swinburne each have these related equiprobability objections, but I say they don't work. I don't think they are. I don't think they're ultimately sound. And so the thesis is going to be true until we're actually presented with some such reason. So, and then the other part of the question was, what are its advantages over these other positions? Well, one advantage is it's true. That's always an advantage. Another sort of, and another kind of point in favor of skeptical theism, which is a little more controversial, is that, well, I don't think skeptical theism rules out these other options. You can still give defenses. You can still arguably use some theodicies. And so it's arguably compatible with these other views. It's not ruling them out.
Yeah.
Did that answer the question, or did I go?
It did. No, that's very good. All right, so let me finish. With this, and I want to make sure we mention your book again. Do I want to finish with this, or is this going to be too much of a? I'll just finish it. Do you think, in certain ways? So there are. I've sort of wondered whether classical theism is, in some respects, a sort of proto-skeptical theism. So take somebody like Brian Davis's work, right? I'm not necessarily endorsing this approach to the problem of evil. But he wants to say, and this often startles people, that God is not a moral agent. To appreciate that, you have to understand the sort of tradition that Davis is in, which is a natural law tradition. And he thinks that there are just certain things that are true of us, the fact that we are creatures that are journeying toward further states of perfection, and that we have virtues, and virtues are the perfections of our powers and certain good habits and dispositions. And he thinks when you really think about God, none of these things actually really apply to God, right? And that's what makes him say, not that we can't say that God is perfectly good, but to say that God is not a moral agent like we are moral agents. So he actually thinks that the problem of evil is just like one large category mistake, right? He thinks it's just being way too anthropomorphic. I think his project is a very serious one. I do, but I think it sort of invites similar concerns that have been raised against skeptical theism. Now, maybe similar responses could be issued as well. Do you see relationship at all between your project and somebody like what Brian Davis is up to, or do you see them as being quite distinct? When you look back into tradition, do you see the seeds of skeptical theism there, and this is just a further development of it, or do you really just think this is just a completely different creature?
I definitely think they're related in some sense. It's also like Mark Murphy also has a book where he says something like, God is an absolutely perfect being is not morally perfect, or something like that, which sounds like it's along the similar lines with Davies. I mean, similar things are being done. These are going to have similar effects on arguments, and I think that similar worries can be raised to each of them. But I don't know. I'm not sure. I remember when I was reading Mark Murphy's book, I thought what he was saying was pretty plausible. But it's a further thesis that God is not a moral agent, or that he is not morally perfect. And one advantage to skeptical theism is that you're not necessarily saddled with that view,
right? Which
is going to be controversial. But I do think those positions are interesting, and that they do have similar effects.
Awesome. Good to have your statement on that. Where can people get your book? What is the title of it, and your website and all that good stuff?
The title of my website is just perryhendricks.com. The title of the book, I'm very creative. So I called it Skeptical Theism. And the cover is a praying mantis eating a cicada, which is a picture my wife took.
Oh, really? That's cool.
Well, I think it's kind of cool. Jim Elliott wasn't a fan of the cover, but Jim Elliott's complaints aside. And let's see, that's the name of the book. You can get it from Amazon. I don't get any royalties from it, so if you just want to send me money, that'll help enrich me.
That'd be super. Yeah. Send it through me first, right? I'll pass it along. Don't be skeptical. Awesome. Well, Perry, you're doing lots of great work. It's been great to have you on the podcast, and I hope we can do it again sometime.